that most of the stuff that we're going to cover today is stuff that I have to refer back to. So the focus today is really a surveyed look at features of Hebrew exegesis, and that's to help prepare you to give more substantive responses during our study material. And so the first week in Habakkuk, next week we'll dive into the first 4 verses, and I'm going to have you look at some of the language. We'll look at theology, and then at the close we'll cover the big 4, which are fundamental questions that you ask when you're performing hermeneutics, or when you're doing the practical side of hermeneutics. Because hermeneutics is largely philosophical until you have a methodology that you use when you approach the text. And so this plus those 4 questions that you go through are your methodology for studying at a deeper level. The stuff that we cover here today is not meant to discourage you from your English translation. What you'll come to find, especially looking at the worksheet, is a lot of this stuff, your English translations do a good job of explaining it or giving the best sense that they can. But there are other tools out there that you can use, like the Amplified translation. They have that online, or you can buy a physical copy. The NET, which is Dallas Seminary's translation, they typically do a better job giving an amplified translation. Plus, they have footnotes that deal a lot with the language, which is really helpful. And Grisanti, he did the editing work on the NET translation, and so it's very well done. But the fundamental tool that you're going to use for over the course of the summer is Blue Letter Bible. If you've got something more advanced, like Brian has access to Logos, which is fine, but that's a paid-for software that you get as a byproduct of being a seminary student. But if you for the lay person, having something like Blue Letter Bible is a fantastic tool to introduce you to the language. They've got dictionary articles on there. They've got some basic commentaries, and we will use all of those things over the course of the summer to help you deepen your ability to handle the text. So for today, let me start covering this. If you would like a printed out version of this, let me know, and I will make it available for you. Good morning.
I'm Mark Olson.
Mark. I'm Paul. No, we just got started.
Oh.
Paul, good to meet you.
Pronounce your last name for me.
Beausoleil.
What nationality is that?
French.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I tried pronunciation of a lot of names, but I did not get this.
Yeah, you're not the only one. So we had just got started, Mark. We were just talking about kind of the purpose behind today, the purpose behind the whole summer study, largely to equip you to study the biblical text on a deeper level. The stuff that we're covering today, these features of Hebrew exegesis, this is all a preparatory stage for starting next week. We're jumping into the first 4 verses. This stuff, if you don't have access to it on a computer, I can print you off a hard copy, and you can have it with you. I was just telling the guys that this is reference material. So this is stuff that you can have sitting next to you as you study. This isn't stuff you need to memorize. A lot of it will become part of your memory the more that you do it. But this is a reference tool for you. And then there's a worksheet in front of you. That's partly what we're going to cover today too, so that we can see the stuff and then practice diagnosing it together. And then the goal behind the study as a whole is to just give you the tools, give you the confidence to study at a deeper level. And so we're going to be using largely a Blue Letter Bible, which is a free app or website, depending on what you choose to use. The website, I'll show you a little bit later how to work through it, because there is a little bit of a learning curve just being able to find everything. But Blue Letter Bible gives you access to language, dictionaries, cross-reference tools, commentaries, and it's all free, which is wonderful. So that's all we had covered so far. But we'll go ahead and we'll jump into this so that we have time to cover everything. Once we walk through everything, if there are still questions or you need help with stuff, I'll be glad to answer that. Okay. The goal of Hebrew exegesis, typically we'll approach something like that sounds advanced like this and say, what good is it and how is it actually going to help me? Your ultimate goal in learning the stuff that we cover here today and the stuff that you learn over the course of the summer is to help you answer three fundamental questions. What does the text say? And you can get a sense of that by looking at lexical forms in Blue Letter Bible. What does the text say? What is it actually saying? But then you're asking, subsequent to that, what does the text mean by what it says? And that will come about as the fruit of your study, as the fruit of your being able to diagnose certain parts of speech, and as the fruit of your study using dictionaries and that sort of thing. So what does it say? What does it mean? But then finally being able to answer the question, how do I bend my life to conform to what the text says? How do I put what I've studied into practice so that we're not pulling up short in our study in application? Because personally, I believe that's an epidemic in modern Christian circles. Is the study part comes by and large second nature, but application on a level where you're really taking time to meditate on where does this bisect my life and how do I actually put it into practice, that's largely missing. And I think the more that we can practice doing this on a consistent and deeper level, the easier we will find our sanctification process. And a lot of the things that we encounter in our daily life, we'll find that the text has already given us answers to that, and we'll have those applications built into the back of our mind. And that's just the Spirit's work in helping us understand and apply Scripture. And then the further fruit of that is being able to pass along the things that you've learned to those who are around you, right? My wife and I are going through, or she's going through this Habakkuk study with us simultaneously. But the fruit of the study that we do here, we can take and pass along to our wives, our children, and our grandchildren, and so forth, or even people in our growth group, things like that. So that's kind of the goal behind all this. It's not just trying to make you biblical erudites. It's got meaningful thrust behind it, so that you can see that as you study the original language, clarity and depth kind of become the norm in what you see in Scripture. There are two primary categories of what we're looking at in terms of exegetical features. The first is lexical. That's how a particular word is used. And attached to that is being able to do proper word studies, which you will do to some degree over the course of this class. We don't need to do an entire half class period on doing lexical studies. You'll do that just by osmosis. The focus of this, though, is syntactical. The grammatical relationships that we find in Hebrew and how they relate to one another. What's significant? What do I actually look at? And so that's going to be the focus of the rest of this, is syntactical features in the original language, in the Hebrew text, that are significant and worth noting. And so that really begins in no particular order of significance. We're looking first at nonverbal. So stuff that's significant in the text that isn't in a verb form. And so we can start with things like negations. And there are two different types of negations in the original Hebrew language. Well, there's more than two, but these are the two most prevalent and the most significant. The first is a term up here. This is lo, and this is al. And when you've got Blue Letter Bible open, let's just go to Genesis 3:1 real quick. So let me open. This is Blue Letter Bible's website, blueletterbible.org. When you go to the home page, this is what it looks like. Here's a drop-down menu. You can choose your translation, and then up here you would just type in which verse or chapter you want to go to. Then it'll bring you here. This is the breakdown, and most of what you're going to be doing, what you're going to be looking at, can be found by simply clicking this tools. And at the top, there's this first tab called Interlinear. It will open up this down below. This is giving you access to the original language. Here's the original Masoretic text. And down here is where you'll be spending a lot of your time looking at particular words, particular parts of speech, and so forth. In this instance, the first thing that we're looking at is a negation. Two different forms. The one that you're going to find that has the greatest significance is this little particle called lo. And when you're here in Blue Letter Bible, you can leave it on reverse. It'll automatically be here. If you want a little bit easier read, you can click this reverse inline. And then it'll bring this up, as we read it in an interlinear in English. This is going to give you English word order down here. And so if we scroll down, what we find is the serpent speaking to the woman. And the first thing that he says is, has God really said, you shall not eat from any tree of the garden? And what we find is this little particle here, lo. And if you hover over it, it'll bring it up here. And when you see that, next to a verb form that the Hebrew parsing says, the way that you bring this up is click this little bubble down here. It'll bring up this form. And on the side, you'll get the parts of speech. And whenever you see a lo particle or the negative particle next to a imperfect verb type, which we'll cover that in a little bit, it's conveying a permanent negation. So in other words, what do we find in Genesis 3:1? We find the serpent saying to Eve, did God say you can never eat from any tree? That's the meaning behind that. Then we'll look at the second prohibition. We've got a different negative particle, and when it's next to an imperfect verb, same as before, we'll cover this in a little bit. This is just an immediate prohibition. Don't do this, or stop doing this, and stop doing it right now. Same thing here. Exodus 23:7, do not kill. That's what we find here. We find that little particle al next to a imperfect verb, and it's the expression do not kill. And this is stuff that I'm going to ask you to look at. In fact, the first week or next week, I think there's at least one, maybe two of these negations that I'm going to have you look at. Tell me, diagnose this for me. What does it look like and what does it mean? So having these next to you, having these at least filed away somewhere in the back of your mind is helpful. There's one more type of negation, that same little tiny particle lo, when it's placed next to a different verb type, which we'll cover. There's two main ones, perfect and imperfect. When it's next to the perfect, it's just giving us a basic negation. He didn't do this. And we see an example of that in Jeremiah 44:17. We didn't see disaster. We have lo and a verb that's perfect, and it's just a basic negation. There are other particles down here like ayin that are also negative particles, but you're not going to encounter those very much at all in the Hebrew text. Nonverbals, another form of those is adjectives. And adjectives in biblical Hebrew take a couple of different forms based on their location relative to the noun that they're placed next to. So an attributive adjective is one form, and that type of adjective follows the noun, and it matches in the other parts of speech, gender, number, and definiteness, which you can get a sense of when you look at Blue Letter Bible down here, person, gender, number. They would match for an attributive adjective. And we get an example of that in 2 Kings 5:1. In 2 Kings 5:1, it says he was a mighty man. Here we have the term man, and here we have the adjective which follows. And we'll look at word order near the end and how you can find that, how you can diagnose that on your own using Blue Letter Bible. They make it relatively easy to track with. But then you have another form that's a predicate adjective. This the location relative to the noun switches. Here it's before the noun. Here's the example in Psalm 145:17. There it says Yahweh is righteous. Here's the adjective, and then here's the noun. Because the adjective's before the noun, we have to supply this term is we have to supply a verbal here. And basically, the only question you're asking me at this point is a particular quality being ascribed to a noun, or with the predicate adjective, is some assertion being made about the noun or about the noun's character or something along those lines. In English, we would read the predicate adjective as the ball is round, and an attributive adjective would be the red ball. These are called macrosyntactical markers. These are features that you'll largely find in biblical narrative. And so if we're not in a narrative passage, most of the time you're not going to see these. And really their major significance is that they're going to be the once upon a time type language that we would find in English. Only in Hebrew they're going to be rendered like, then it came about. Then it came about. So in Genesis 15, in verse 12, the text says, then it came about as the sun went down. In other words, this is just introducing a new scene or a new part of the narrative to us. So that's really their only significance. It's helping you know where narratives start and stop.
It's like a character transition in a movie.
Yeah, like a scene moves. Okay, all right, now I know where I'm at. And so when those show up, that's what it's indicating. Sometimes they'll be translated. Sometimes they'll be left untranslated. And so now we've covered some of the nonverbals. There's plenty of other things like prepositions and so forth that they're helpful to know, but not. They don't have the measure of significance that things like adjectives and negations and those types of things have in terms of your ability to understand biblical Hebrew. So the meat and potatoes of your work when you're doing any exegesis, most of what I'm going to be asking of you in the in the study material, in the study packets, is looking at verbs. Every once in a while, I'll have you look at, hey, the word order's changed here. What is that telling you? That type of stuff. But you're really asking three questions when you're getting to, when you're looking at a certain verb. First, you're asking, is it in the cal form? Which we'll cover in just a minute. If it is, then it means what it says. So let's take a moment and we'll pause and we'll go back to this text in Genesis 3:1. Here we have, we've clicked on this little bubble down here along the bottom, and we have this term has said. And over here on the parts of speech where it's breaking down the different elements in this particular verb, what you find is the stem says cal, and it's a perfect, and it's third masculine singular. And you're like, okay, I know what it is. I know what it is. And if the verb that you're looking at, that I have you look at, is in a cal stem, then what you would do is you would click Strong's up here. It's going to take you to this page. And then right here, this outline of biblical usage section is going to be your best friend over the course of the summer. It's going to give you the basic lexical glosses, the basic definitions for a specific term. So for when you're in the cal, you're asking yourself, is it in the cal form? And if I asked you to look for this, you'd be like, yes, it's in the cal form. Then whatever these glosses are, whichever one fits the context the best, is the one that you've chosen, and that's where you stop. Then ask yourself after that, is it only used in the form that is presented? Let's say you come across a term and it only has one of these numerals in it, and it only has a cal form. Then those are the only options that you have in terms of your ability to understand what that term means. And then you're asking after that, is it used in multiple forms throughout the Old Testament? Which this would be used in multiple forms. We have it in these 4 different stems. If it's used in one of these different forms, then you have to factor that in based on whatever it is that you're looking at in particular. So a lot more of this stuff will start to click once we've covered everything and once we start doing the worksheet, because then you're putting it into practice. There are 7 primary stems in the Hebrew language. You've got the cal, the nifal, the pl, the pual, the hifil, hofal, and hethpile. You have some substems that show up in the language, but they show up so infrequently that 99% of your study you won't encounter these. But when you do, then you can take note of them, and Blue Letter Bible can help you a little bit with the definitions and so forth. So let's look at the first stem. The first stem is the cal. I put my attempt at a pronunciation in parentheses in each of these. The cal stem. It's the common verbal stem. It's the most common one that you're going to find, and it just conveys simple action. It's a simple active verb. It's the bread and butter of Hebrew language, and so when you find that a verb shows up that you're looking at, and it's not in the cal form, that there should be a little red flag that goes up that says, okay, I need to take a look at this a little more carefully. There's really no nuances to this basic lexical form unless you identify the verb as fientive or stative. And I'll show you a little tiny verb box that appears at the end of this presentation that will help you diagnose that a little bit better. But let's just, for the sake of example, we'll look at one in just a second. For an amplified understanding of cal, you would consider 2 sub-distinctions: the fientive, which conveys action or doing, or stative, which conveys a state of being. These are really the only things that are tied to the cal form that are worth putting in the extra time investment to understand. Determining whether the cal is fiative or stative, whether it's conveying action or a state of being, is really easy. All you're going to do is you've got the clicked on the verb that you're looking at. It's a cal. You've clicked on the Strong's to get the definition, and then you drop down into the outline of biblical usage, and you're looking at this set of potential definitions, of potential glosses. You look through the list, and if you don't see any glosses, any definitions that say to be, then the verb is fiative. It's conveying action. If you were to click on one of the verbs and it's got a to be, here's another example. You shall eat. Yeah, this one doesn't have to be in it either. In the cal form, it has to have a to be something in its cal definitions. If it's got a to be in there, then it's to be understood in a stative way. So that's a very easy way to diagnose that. In most instances, if a to be verb is not present, you're just thinking about it in terms of simple action, and it's considered fiative. The only reason why this is important or worth noting is because when you get to the a couple of stems from now in the PL, being able to diagnose the cal as fiative or stative will help you with a couple of the nuances in that particular stem. So we've got a verb box at the end of this presentation that will help you once we cover the rest of some of this material. So this is the verb box. This is at the end, and it will help you in your diagnosis of the significance of that. So after the cal is the next stem, the nifal. This is basically the passive form of the cal. So the things that we just talked about in the cal stem being simple action, this is simple passive. This is the simple passive verbal sense. Ruth 1:17 has an example of just the basic use of the nifal. Nifal is typically rendered as just a simple passive. 75% of the time when you see this particular stem being used, it's going to just convey passive action. 25% of the time, there's going to be some reflexive nuance to that. In other words, something's being done for oneself. There are some nuances to the nifal, so we don't want to just blanket state it's just the simple passive. That's helpful knowing off the top. But there are a couple of other ways in which this can be used. And so you would identify the nifal, and then you would think through, does the context of the particular passage give me enough detail to say this is being used in a reflexive sense or this is being used in a middle sense. Middle is very infrequent, but it's worth being aware that it's there. Sometimes you'll see a nifal like in Ezekiel 1:1. The middle nifal is just giving you a quasi-active sense. In other words, it's not fully passive, it's not fully active, it's lost somewhere in between. In English, we would render that the gate opened. There's a sense in which the action is being done, not in a passive sense, not fully active. And we find examples of that here, Ezekiel 1, 1 Kings 1. The other one that's worth noting is the reflexive. In other words, the subject is also the object of the verb. Here are some examples in the Old Testament where you find that. And these would be good that if you've got extra downtime, extra time in your studies, you're like, I really want to know what this looks like in the flow of a particular passage, you can look these up, find their particular instance, and see how the English translation renders them. So by and large, nifal is the simple passive. The PLs where things start to heat up a little bit. The PL's intensive, or it's factative, causative, active. That's a mouthful. And this is where understanding how the cal is being used, whether the cal is fientive or whether the cal is stative, this is where that becomes helpful. Where you find the basic sense of the PL when it's being used in an intensive sense, the lexical gloss that you'll find in Blue Letter Bible will typically give you a good idea of the difference in a regular form and an intensified form. Let's see if I can find an example here in this same. I think this is the same. Yeah, this one. Okay, here we go. The difference here, where you find the cal just has basic to eat. But if you've come across it and it's in the PL, you get an intensified idea with the idea of consume. And so this would be your lexical gloss if it showed up in the PL. But you see that the way that the English renders the difference here to eat, an intensified sense consume. The same holds true when you find a up here. You find smite instead of hit, and the outline of biblical usage will give you a sense of an intensified version of the cal form. When the PL shows up as a factative, causative, active, it's conveying the subject is putting the object into a particular state of being, and that's why knowing the difference between the cal fientive or the cal stative is helpful, because then you can diagnose this. And we would render in English, she caused Jim to become hungry. The verbal sense is implying bringing about of a particular state. That's how the factative, causative, active would be rendered in English. And so being able to diagnose the cal fientive or stative is helpful in knowing the difference between these two, an intensive PL or a factative, causative, active. Here's an example from Habakkuk 2:1. So, 3 or 4 weeks into our study, we'll run across this verb, I will keep watch. It's a PL, and the PL there has a cal form that's fientive. It's conveying action. There's no to be in the gloss list when you click on that. And so we can render the PL then as an intensive form. The PL is an intensive, I will keep watch. There's not really an intensified way of conveying keeping watch, and so we would leave the lexical gloss the same, just because we don't have a word in English that would help convey that in an amplified sense. There are some nuances to the PL. There's a pluralative, which is conveying action being repeated. And then there's a declarative, which is just making some sort of proclamation. The declarative shows up in Job 33:32, and the pluralative shows up in Psalm 119:26a. And so what you would do is, if you were taking notes on that particular section, you would supply in your notes the term continually or repeatedly. That's how you would understand that particular nuance. Then the pual, this one's relatively easy. It's basically just the passive mirror of the PL. So everything that we talked about in the PL is also true for the pual, only the pual is the passive form of that. It's the passive mirror. 40% of the time that you see a pual in the biblical text, it's in a participle. and then we'll work through how to handle a participle pretty shortly. The next one would be the hiphil. The hiphil is the causative active stem. There are some elements to this that make it sound very similar to the causative form of the PL. But the causative active form of the hiphil implies the subject is causing the object to perform a particular action. In other words, I make somebody do his homework. That's how we would render that in English. And the primary difference between the hiphil in its factative causative sense and the hiphil in the causative active and the PL in the factative causative is the PL was putting somebody into a particular state, making them enter into a state of being hungry, while the hiphil is conveying, causing the object to perform or enter into some type of action. And with the hiphil, you got a sense in which the subject is also the agent of the action. They're participating in some way. And so when you encounter that, there's probably 4 or 5 in the second lesson in Habakkuk that we'll consider that of the hiphils that show up, and what are they conveying. There are a couple of nuances that you can have set aside, noted in your notes. There's an ingressive stative. In other words, this is just conveying that the hiphil is causing a particular state to begin or a particular state to continue. Permissive hiphil, this is also a rare form, but it's the action that's taking place is agreeable to the object and allowed by the subject. Genesis 48:11 is an example of that. So the hiphil is the causative active, causing the object to perform a particular action. The hofal, like the pual, is just the passive mirror of the hiphil. The hofal's the causative passive. So everything that applied to the hiphil is applied to the hofal in a passive sense, which makes those ones a little easier. The last one that has kind of the most significance in terms of when you see it, it carries the most additional weight with it is the heath pile. It is intensive and it's causative reflexive. It carries 2 different subtleties with it when you see it show up. The intensive nature of the stem is reflected in the differences in the lexical glosses, like we saw the difference between to eat or to consume. That would also be reflected in the heath pile. And then the reflexive nature, the causative reflexive, meaning there's some form in which the subject's taking place, he's participating in the action. I think the best example of the heath pile and its significance shows up in Genesis 5:24. There you have the expression Enoch walked with God, where walked is in the heath pile form. It's conveying an intense, deliberate, habitual walk with God. So that's where we would see our English, unless we're rendering it in an amplified sense, kind of falling short in its ability to fully convey what's being meant there. There's this intense, deliberate, lifelong, purposeful walk with God. So that's often what you're going to find when you encounter the heath pile. Not as often, but when it shows up, it's worth diagnosing. And it, like so many others, has some nuances that are worth noting. The reciprocal version is just subjects are acting in relationship to each other, or an iterative version. In other words, the action is taking place, start and stop over time, repeated. So the stems we've covered in brief fashion, and again, this is all reference material. You pull this out and consult it when you're studying. I'm merely going through this to help flush out anything that might be unclear. We've covered the stems. The verb types are the next section, perfect and imperfect. We've encountered those terms earlier when we looked at the cal, the imperfect and the perfect. They're essentially identifying action as it relates to the passage of time, whether it's completed action, whether it's durative action taking place over time, or whether it's repeated, start and stop and start and stop. So that's what the types are conveying. The perfect is giving you a completed whole, giving you a picture, a snapshot of the action that's taking place. Typically, what you'll find, the most common mistake is a blanket stating the perfect as always being past tense. While that is largely how it's being used, it's not always being used in a past tense sense. So when you're first learning, sometimes it's helpful to just, perfect is giving me some idea of past tense. Imperfect is giving me some idea of future. But knowing that it can be used in other ways is really important, because we don't want to make missteps when we're identifying things, at least if we can avoid it. Some nuances of the perfect. It's giving us a sense of the state, of a particular state of affairs that's going on. This is giving us a sense of a particular state of mind. And then here we have a rhetorical future. In other words, the perfect is being used, implying future tense, an action that's going to come about, but from the speaker's point of view, it's a virtual certainty. And it's as if it's already taken place. It's as good as done. In fact, you'll see this in a lot of the covenant language in Genesis. You'll find them show up in rhetorical future. From God's point of view, it's as good as done. And so he uses this particular form, not meaning past tense, but giving us a sense of certainty, virtual certainty in the future. The imperfect, in contrast to the perfect, views the verbal activity as being in progress or underway. And that's largely where we get this idea of future tense. Something will happen. That's how we would render it in English. But the imperfect is just giving you a sense of the activity is in some ongoing process. It's not done. We're not looking at it as in a snapshot form. And so that's why we can't blanket the imperfect as a purely future. We can't blanket the perfect as a purely past. There are some instances where that changes. But the future, the imperfect, by and large, is going to give you some sense of future activity just because the action is in progress. It's not done yet. Genesis 2:19, Genesis 15:15. Again, covenant language. This will happen. And so forth. And then we have some nuances with the imperfect also. Customary, imperfect. You would make these distinctions in all the nuances. Does the context give me license to view it in this way? Is the action being done customarily or iteratively or regularly over time? Job 1:5. Job is bringing offerings for his children continuously, iteratively over time. Progressive imperfect is the action's underway or it's in progress at that particular time. These two passages in Genesis 16 and 24 give you a sense of the action being in progress or underway. And then another subtlety, another nuance, there's a contingent command. There's a strong warning being given, a strong prohibition being given, where the prohibition or the warning is continually valid. And what you find, Exodus 20:15, shall not kill, that's a strong warning that has continual validity. So those are the two primary verb types. Every once in a while, you're going to approach a modal, which is a subtype of a verb. So perfect and imperfect are the primary types. A modal or a volitional form is a subtype, and it shows up in three different subtypes: imperatives, justives, or cohortatives. An imperative is exactly like what it sounds, conveying a command, conveying permission. There's a sense in which it also conveys a prayer or an entreaty. And how we determine between these two very different ideas, a prayer or a command, is looking at who is speaking to whom. If it's a superior speaking to an inferior, it's going to come across as a command. If it's a peer-to-peer, Moses speaking to Israel, it could be permission. It could also be a command. But when it's Yahweh speaking to Abraham or Yahweh speaking to Moses or whatever, or Moses or Abraham speaking to Yahweh in an imperative, it's going to come across as a prayer, as an entreaty, because they're not commanding Yahweh, they're asking permission. They're making a treaty. They're entreating Yahweh. They're pleading with him to some degree. So you have to know who's speaking to whom in the context. Most of the time, it's going to show up as a command, but you'd be theologically pressed to say someone's commanding God to do something. So the jussive is the other form. It's going to convey a wish or some desire. Psalm 119, verse 10. The psalmist says there, "Don't let me stray from your commands." That comes off in a jussive form. He's making a wish. He's making a desire. He's, please don't let this happen to me. In this particular instance, it just so happens that the jussive is also negated. Do not let me stray. So it's a negative wish. I don't want this to happen to me. The final modal form is a cohortative, and it's conveying intent or resolve. The best example of that, Psalm 119:15. There, the psalmist says, "I will meditate on your precepts." In other words, I'm intent, I'm resolved, I'm resolute to do this, no matter what it takes. And so those are our three modals, three volitive forms, three volitionals that show up that have particular meaning, particular significance when you encounter them. Infinitives, another verbal subtype. Two different forms, infinitive construct or infinitive absolute. Infinitive construct comes closest to our use of an infinitive in the English language, to do something. But it often shows up rendered in English kind of like a noun. The distinction between the infinitive construct and the infinitive absolute is the addition of a prepositional phrase that's added to it. And typically what you'll find is in these instances, you'll find some little particle like this or like this or like this attached to the front of the word, and you're like, I don't know what's going on here. And all that's doing is signaling to you how that particular infinitive construct is being used. Is it being used in a temporal sense? Is it being used to convey action that's immediately taking place immediately before the action of the verb? Or is it being used to convey some purpose or some result of some action? And so the infinitive construct is going to key you into basically temporal relationships or purpose or a result in a particular clause. Then the second type is the infinitive absolute. The infinitive absolute is like the infinitive construct, but its primary form is to strengthen the main verb, much like we would use adverbs in English. But the infinitive absolute is always going to follow an imperative, or it's always going to follow a participle. In other words, it's not going to show up very often, but when it does, there's something very important being conveyed. In an emphatic form of that, you'd find in Genesis 18. It can also be used in a continuous sense, depending on where the infinitive absolute is placed relative to the verb. So if it's before the verb, it's going to convey emphasis. If it's found after a verb, It's going to convey durative or continuous action. And then there's a nuance that's also worth noting. Sometimes it conveys the manner in which an action is performed. Joshua 2:5, Exegesis 33:7, both have those forms with that particular nuance. Most of the time when you see this, though, it's, this is important. What's being said is really important. Participles, the last subtype, they're going to occur relatively frequently in biblical Hebrew, and they're used in really three different ways. Attributive, which renders the participle in a relative clause, with who, whom, which, that, so forth. The person who did this, that something would take place, or so forth. That's how it would be rendered in English. That would be an attributive participle. The way that you identify that is, determining whether the participle has an article on it, and to see if it follows a noun. If it's right next to a noun and it's right behind it, then it's more than likely being used in an attributive sense. The substantive sense is the other form that you would see a participle being used. It's just functioning as a noun. It's lost its verbal roots, and it's just being used like a noun. But it is giving a description of a particular vocation, which is significant because what we find in Psalm 23:1, Yahweh is my shepherd. My shepherd is a participle, and it's being used in a substantive sense. And so what that's conveying is, look, Yahweh's vocation, his job is to be my shepherd, which is significant. Numbers 14:31, Moses calls the people of Israel rebels, and the rebels there is a participle being used in a substantive form. Your career rebels, your career problem makers. So you get a sense of the significance of that there. And then you've got verbal participles, which is the other form, and they're conveying some durative action sense. And the context is going to give you the clue as to which form, whether it's being used in a characteristic sense, giving you an idea of repetitive or habitual action, and we would translate that with the plural S at the end. He runs. He does this repetitively, habitually. The other verbal participle form is continuous, depicting continual or ongoing action. He's running. That's how we would convey that in English. It's ongoing. He's running right now, and it's going on at the present moment. Those are the main forms in the participle. Then we've got narrative functions, which we're not going to be encountering a whole lot in our time in Habakkuk. That doesn't mean they are not going to be there, but these are helpful as you branch outside of Habakkuk, and perhaps even in when we're covering Genesis on Sundays and you're in your growth groups. These things are helpful in that sub-study. There's two narrative functions that have the most significance. The first is the vayikol, and the second one is the vekatol. They're grammatical features that appear most frequently in biblical narrative. Doesn't mean they're used exclusively in biblical narrative, because they do show up in biblical poetry at times. But there is often exegetical significance tied to one of these two forms showing up in biblical poetry. Vayikol, the primary engine in biblical narrative. It's just pushing the scene along. It's changed together, and it's adding little bits and pieces to the flow of a particular narrative. Genesis 1 is a good example of that. You have a large vayikol chain, and it's just chaining things together, tying the narrative together. And you're not going to find that outside of narrative. Vayikol chains are exclusive to biblical narrative. That's not going to show up in Hebrew poetry. And so that's one of the ways that we can be confident about Genesis 1 being narrative and not poetry. There are nuances of the Vayikol. It can be used to convey consequence, the logical result of a particular action or a particular situation. Genesis 2:1, there's a Vayikol there. It's conveying consequence. In other words, therefore, or then, as a result of, so forth. There's also epexegetical Vayikols. That's a big, complex word for just saying they're clarifying, they're expanding, they're paraphrasing something that has come right before it. It'll show up in Genesis, Numbers, 1 Samuel. These are all examples of that. The other form is the Vekatol. It's a feature that's used in both narrative and poetry, and its primary purpose is to just draw a logical connection to whatever has come right before it. It's a tactic that's used in narrative and poetry, and there are some nuances to the Vekatol that allow it to behave a little bit like the Vayikol sometimes. So that's why we have to treat each thing on an individual basis. And part of what I'm going to be doing with your study packet is aiding you in looking at the ones that have real significance. It would take you 10, 20 times as long to go through the study material if I was having you look at everything. So I'm trying to pick out the ones in the study packet for Habakkuk that are that fit into one of these categories so that you can gain confidence in diagnosing them. The sequential Vekatol is one, just denoting temporal sequence. Consequential, same as the Vayikol, giving you the same idea. The volitional Vekatol shows up relatively frequently. Typically, it's tying a command to another command. So it would follow an imperative, but it can also follow a adjussive or a cohortative. So it would follow, because it's called a volitional Vekatol, it would follow one of the volitional forms or the modals that we covered earlier. And it's just, it's conveying a command, a wish, something that's taking consecutively, or something that's going on in succession. These show up fairly frequently. Typically, you'll find them in big blocks where multiple commands are given. Deuteronomy 6:4-9 has got a whole bunch of these. Yahweh's just chaining commands together. And typically, it's got some nuance that's outlined right up here. Iterative Vekatol, used very infrequently, but it's also worth noting. It's just giving you a sense of repeated action. So what you find is in a lot of these forms and types, habitual repeated action shows up a lot. Progressive action shows up a lot. And what you'll find is that sometimes the English translation conveys that, and other times it doesn't. And so that's why knowing these particular features is helpful, because then you can look and say, okay, there's a little bit more depth to what's being said here that will help me study. Narrative functions continued. Anytime you see the simple conjunction vav, that's how we would pronounce this. It looks like this. It looks like just a little line. Typically, a sentence will begin with this and a verb, especially in narrative. And where that pattern breaks, then there can be some significance there. And we'll look at that in one of the examples on the worksheet. It's making some parenthetical statement. It's either starting a new narrative, a lot like the macrosyntactical marker that we looked at the very beginning. It can pause a narrative in the middle in order to add some extra detail so that we understand what's going on. Or it can be used to terminate a particular narrative, giving us some conclusion, some final thought, some moral to the story. And we'll look at a couple of examples of that when we're looking at our worksheet. Hebrew word order is really the last thing that's of any consequence to you. In English, our sentences typically follow a very rigid word order: subject, verb, object, I hit the ball. When we change that word order in English, it would make our sentences illogical. We would start sounding like Yoda on Star Wars. So we have a very rigid word order just for logic's sake in English. So if we want to emphasize something in English, we would italicize it in writing, or we would change our vocal inflection in speaking. In biblical Hebrew, they have a general word order that is fixed. It's verb, and then subject, and then an object. But instead of italicizing words or speaking something with some particular level of vocal inflection, they can change the word order, and it still makes sense. So Hebrew can change the word order to serve the purpose of emphasizing something. Psalm 119, verse 10, the psalmist says, "With all of my heart I have sought you." That's actually I'm pretty sure that's the way the ESV translates that. And so they have fronted with all of my heart before I have sought you. That would just give us some clue to the psalmist switching the word order and placing emphasis on "with all of my heart." The one caveat to that is when we're in Hebrew poetry, especially Hebrew poetry that is in its macro structure is an acrostic. Psalm 119 is an example of that. So we have to diagnose word order on a case-by-case basis in those instances, because we don't know if the word order has been switched to place emphasis on something, or the word order has been switched in order to maintain the acrostic macro structure, or if it's some mixture of both. And so we need to analyze those on a case-by-case basis. This Psalm 119:10, that's an instance where it's maintaining the acrostic and it's placing emphasis on that particular phrase. So what you'll notice is that when the word order shifts anywhere else, like in Habakkuk, like in any of the examples that we look at today, when the word order shifts, emphasis is being placed on whatever shifts in front of the verb. The verb is typically what starts the clause in biblical Hebrew. Whatever's placed before it is the author's way of saying, hey, this is important. Then we've got the cal verb box. This is an appendix to that. This is just a way of identifying fiative or stative and what the implication of that is. Say you're looking at a cal form. You diagnose that it's fiative and it's in the perfect. This is what it's conveying. It's looking at action as a whole or a completed action. In English, we would render that something like he cut the grass. Looking at the action as a whole. Say you diagnose the cal, it's a fiative, but it's an imperfect form. It can either be used ingressive, in other words, it's giving you a sense of the beginning of some particular action, or it can be used in a durative sense, some particular action is continuing. He began cutting the grass, we would have to supply began in an English translation. Or he is cutting the grass, and this is going on at the present time. That's how we would understand that. If you diagnose the cal form and it's a stative, in other words, it's giving you some sense of state of being, then we would render it something along the lines of, and it's in the perfect, he's hungry. Or you diagnose the cal and it's stative and it's in an imperfect form, he is becoming hungry. You're entering into a state of becoming something. So that's another reference tool that you can use. If, say, you're looking at a cal and it's a perfect, and you're like, is there anything else to be said about this particular term that's being used? You can come drop down into the verb box, look at the grid, and make some estimative assessment of what the significance of that is. And then the end of this is just some grammar resources. If you want to add anything to your resource list, to your library at home, these are some options, starting with the top down, the top being less technical, a little bit easier, down to the bottom being more technical and more complex. So those are options for you if you decide that you ever want to add to your library. So we've covered everything kind of fire hose style. But all of this is lost in ethereal land unless we try to put it into practice. So what we'll do is we will take the next little bit and we'll walk through this worksheet together. So I'll bring up on Blue Letter Bible each of these verses. We'll look at the underlined section, and then I'll have you guys diagnose it with me. And that way we've got not only a little archive of particular passages, but we've also learned how to diagnose certain things. Okay, so let's look at number 1 on the worksheet. So we're going to be using Blue Letter Bible to examine these. So if we bring up Blue Letter Bible and we look at Genesis 1, verse 3. We've got Genesis 1, verse 3 opened. We've got this interlinear set up. We've got our reverse inline. And the term that we want to look at is let there be light. So we would locate that. And we're looking specifically at let there be. And so Blue Letter Bible has this set up. So we would click on the little bubble down here. And what are the parts of speech? Maybe you can take a swing at that along the side here. What do we got, Jesse?
It's I always forget. I always want to say qual.
Yeah, Cal,
and
like
Joseph.
Okay, Cal Joseph. Okay. So let's go back to our.
Where did you get the Justin?
So it's right here next to type.
Oh.
Yep. Yeah, good question. So Joseph there.
Okay. 2 questions.
Cal Joseph. And then we would go back to our sheet. Let's find the Joseph on our subtype. Did I pass it? Yes, I did. There it is. Okay, so what is this conveying? Let there be light. What does the Joseph convey? Brian, you want to take a stab at that?
A wish or desire.
A wish or desire. Okay. Now let's think about the significance of what's being said. We go back to Genesis 3:1. Who's speaking? God. Yahweh's speaking. And he's expressing what? A wish or a desire, right? A wish or a desire for what? Light. So we typically we would look at this passage in English, in our English translations, and we would okay, let there be light. That looks like a command. And even sometimes it can be preached that way. But what we find, it's a Joseph. And the significance of that is that just purely God's desire for something causes it to come about. That's massively significant in terms of theological power. His omnipotence on display there. Not even commanding something to be, just desiring it for it to be there, and it was there. So that would be the exegetical significance. Yahweh's wish, his desire, is what brought about light.
So it is a command, but it's rooted from his desire.
It is a command in a sense, but from a grammatical standpoint, we've got it in a Joseph.
Yeah.
So it's just his desire. I want this to be, and there it was,
That's cool. Man.
which is really, really cool.
It actually really changes it a lot because it isn't just him saying, "Let there be light."
Yes.
It's him just kind of I imagine just kind of sitting on the front porch going, kind of cool if there was light.
Yeah.
Boom!
Yeah.
There's light.
Right.
But it changes the way that you perceive the text.
Yes.
Because my whole Christian life, and even before that, because of all the little Bible study things that I've done throughout my life,
Yeah.
it was always preached as a command.
Yes.
But it makes it, man, there's a deeper feeling there.
Yes.
It's just a simple desire that he had, and it
Yeah.
began the creation.
Yeah.
Shows you his heart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And his power with that.
Wow, we haven't got very far. It's already
Yeah,
awesome.
Keith.
Okay, that sounds good, but it also says he said.
Correct. So there is there's something coming out of his mouth. This is not something that's inarticulate. It's being spoken, but it's a spoken wish. It's a spoken desire.
So would it be more grammatically, like maybe even in the English translation, like he said, "I wish there to be light."
Yes, I desire light to be,
Right.
and there it was.
I like desire better.
Yeah.
You wish God doesn't wish.
Yeah. Right.
He does.
Yeah. 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 So that's how I would translate it. If I was translating this again, I would render it, desire light to be,
Yeah.
and there it was.
Yeah. God said, "I desire there to be light."
Yeah.
And there it was.
Mhm.
That's a trip.
Yeah. Yes.
The depth of God's word. It's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. So we've encountered the jussive. We've seen it in practice. Let's look at number 2, Genesis 2:17. Genesis 2:17. So we're in the beginning of the God's expressions to Adam and Eve. The Lord God took the man, put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and keep it. He commanded the man, saying, "You may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat." So we clicked on tools. We went to interlinear. We can click on reverse inline. It helps us a little bit. For in the day that you eat from it, or on the day you eat from it, on the worksheet, you shall surely die. Okay? So we would click on the surely die.
Quick question. So that's one of the things that I ran into with the
Die.
last time.
Die, not surely die.
What's the better translation to use then for the English? Because
For what?
it says "you shall surely die," but when
Yes.
I'm looking at it, it's broken up. I can never find it.
On here?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So this is giving you, they're rendering it in English, so they're trying to place things around it. But the term that you're going to be looking at for this particular question is surely. I should have underlined that, not the entire thing, although the entire thing is significant. But what I want you to look at particularly here is this term. So what's the parts of speech? Cal. And then what do we have as the type?
Infinitive absolute.
Yep, infinitive absolute. And so our little red flag goes off. We don't encounter infinitive absolute very much. What are we doing with that? So we would drop down into infinitives. Infinitive absolute typically is going to give some strength and idea, but then we need to look at its position relative to the verb that's next to it. Okay, so here we've identified. Okay, we've got this term, and right next to it is this term. And what we'll notice is this term, the cal infinitive absolute, has this as its root, and the verb right next to it has this as its root. It's the same. Okay, and so where is it relative? In biblical Hebrew, we're going right to left. So where is the infinitive absolute in relationship to the verb? It's in front of it. Okay, so if it's in front of it, what are we doing? When it precedes a verb with the same root, okay, check, affirms and intensifies the verbal idea. So we would render this with the expression surely, indeed, definitely. So what does this expression convey? What does it convey? We've identified it as an emphatic infinitive absolute. What is it conveying? It's in the title.
But it will happen.
Yeah, some emphasis. And then the English does a good job here. They have supplied the term surely, which is in our list. That's one of the ways that we would translate this. Surely, indeed. So it expresses emphasis, and it expresses certainty, would be another way of putting that. So what's the significance of that?
No,
Yeah, no wiggle room. I like that, Keith. That's fantastic. You will absolutely die. No getting around it. No wiggle room. And that's coming from Yahweh. In the day that you eat from it, you will absolutely die. You will surely die. Indeed, most definitely, you will die. So no wiggle room. No theological white space. No way to get around that. Emphasis, certainty. Those are good ways to understand that. And what we find is that same form shows up in 2:16 too. You may absolutely eat from any tree in the garden. And then what does Satan say? Did God say you can never eat from any tree? Just fantastic. No wiggle room. Good. Okay. Let's look at number 3. Let's go to Isaiah 1. Isaiah 1, 2. Oops. What did I do there? Isaiah 1 and 2. Okay. And we're looking at the term I have reared. It says, listen, O heavens, and hear, O earth. Oops, let me click the right thing. The Lord speaks, sons I have reared. Okay, let's look at this. I have reared. What's our parts of speech?
no,
PL, yep. PL. What's our type? Yep, perfect. Okay, what are we doing with the PL? Do you remember? Let's go back and look. Let's go back and consult our intensive or factitive causative active. Okay, so now we need to know 2 things. Is there a cal form? And is the cal form fientive or stative? So let's click on the Strong's button. Let's go to our outline of biblical usage. And we see, okay, here's a cal. Here's our 3 different ways it can be rendered. Remember, if there's a to be anything in the list, it's stative. Is this a fientive or stative cal? Stative. So it's a stative cal. I would put that in my notes underneath. Stative cal, which means the PL is doing what? The PL is causative active, or in other words, it's doing what? That would be right here. Putting the object into a particular state, right? That's what the expression conveys. Putting the object into a state. So what's going on here? The sons I have reared. I have put my sons into a particular state of being reared. What's the significance of that?
continual growth.
Yeah, Israel's in the state of continual growth. They're in a state of being reared. They're in a state of sonship. So what you'll find, just through our first three examples, some of them, like, mind-boggling change. Some of them, okay, I get it. But, you know, it's not going to entirely change my way of thinking about Scripture. It's just giving me some greater depth to my understanding. So we'll skip number 4 because I didn't underline the correct term that I wanted you to use. And we'll flip over and we'll look at number 5 in Proverbs 6, verse 33. So let's pull up Proverbs 6. And we're looking at, looks like the end of Proverbs 6. So here's Proverbs 6, 33. Click on Tools. Click on Reverse Inline. I don't know why it's doing that now all of a sudden. It's huge. Whatever. We're looking at the phrase, will not be wiped away. Wounds and disgrace he will find, and his reproach will not be blotted out. That's the New American Standard. In the ESV, he will get wounds and dishonor, and his disgrace will not be wiped away. This, in the context, is talking about someone who's committing adultery. All right, now let's look at this. This is the end of our phrase. This is what we're looking at. He will not be wiped away. Okay, what do we got here? Let's look at the whole phrase. What do we find here? Not. We've got some form of a negative particle. Okay, we've identified that. It shows up in the English, not. But it's connected to, it's next to, what is it next to? Is it next to, what's the stem? So I would write in my parts of speech a negative particle. Plus a nifal, what? Imperfect. All right, now let's go back to our sheet and look at negative particles at the very top. I think that was our first slide. Negations, and low next to an imperfect. What do we have here? What is it telling us? What is this? What does the expression convey? A permanent negation. And how else can we render a permanent negation? We can render that with not, but never. So I would just put in parentheses next to mine, never. Okay, what's the significance of that? Let's go back and look at the whole phrase. Wounds and disgrace he will find, and his reproach will never be blotted out. Oof, okay. Wounds and disgrace, wounds and dishonor, disgrace will never be blotted out. What's the significance of that? There's a lasting impact to the one who has committed adultery. Now, we would say never with a caveat, because we live on this side of Christ's advent. So the caveat is, look, it will never be wiped away unless what happens? Yeah, unless we repent and believe. Unless we have Christ to blot it away. Okay. All right, let's look at...
Well, I divide that approach. Because in repentance, the reproach is blotted out by God, but not by the person that he's committed adultery against.
Correct. And there's a sense in which disgrace, to some degree, can last. There's some lasting impact in adultery because it's going to have a ripple effect in our relationships, right? Never, maybe temporally speaking. in eternal sense, then as soon as the person graduates to glory, then that disgrace and that dishonor is gone. But
I can use my own life. Like, I got 3 kids that I talk to, haven't seen them in a long time, and
Right.
it's from past sin.
Yeah.
Like, I am forgiven, but I still got to deal with that stuff.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, good point, Keith. All right, let's look at number 6. Moving into later prophets, Hosea 9, verse 1. Okay, we're looking at do not rejoice. Oops. So here we've got do not rejoice at the beginning of this verse. And we got, okay, I see not. What is not low, it's al. Okay, I've made note of that. Parts of speech, and I'm going to put a negation or a negative particle plus, what is it next to? It's next to a verb form. And what do we have? Ooh, what are our parts of speech here? What do we have over here?
Joseph Qual?
Caljustive.
Yeah.
Caljustive. And what do we find? What's the expression convey? Let's go back to our jussive. Let's go back to our modals, since we know it's in a volitional form. Here's modals. Jussive conveys wish or desire. The psalmist in Psalm 119 gave us a negative wish, which we find because we had a negative plus our jussive. We had a negative and our modal. What is it conveying?
So it's still the wish.
Yep. Still wish, still desire. What is it conveying? Because it's 2 parts of speech that we're looking at. It would be a desire for something not to happen, right? A negative wish.
Yeah, to not rejoice.
Yeah. And who's speaking? Hosea 9. Don't rejoice, or I don't desire for you to rejoice, O Israel. Don't exult like the peoples because of this. Why should you be rejoicing?
Looks like God is speaking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what does he wish? What is he desiring for something not to happen? He's not desiring for them to revel in their spiritual adultery, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I would write under exegetical significance. Desire for non-revelry. Okay. Let's do Genesis 3:8. Let's jump to Genesis 3:8. And we'll look at Genesis 3:8. There we find, when we click on Tools, and the reverse inline, they heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and the man and his wife hid themselves. The man and his wife hid themselves. So we're looking at this particular term here. All right, what do we have? What's our parts of speech? Heath Pael. Yeah, we've got a Heath Pael. They put sequential imperfect on Blue Letter Bible. What you're going to want to look at is the stuff in parentheses, a vayiktol. And because we're in narrative, we've identified Genesis 3 as narrative. The vayiktol's not going to carry the weight here. What you should be looking at is the Heath Pael. What do we need to know about the Heath Pael? Let's go back here and look for our... There it is. It's the what? It's the intensive and causative reflexive stem.
That's
Okay. We know that. Intensive and causative reflexive. Are there any nuances going on here? Is this an iterative? Are they doing this iteratively over time? Are they continuing to hide themselves? No. Is this reciprocal? They're acting in relationship to one another. We could possibly make a case for that. But what is the basic sense of the Heath pile? It's reflexive. It's intensive. They hid themselves. So let's look at the glosses. Let's make sure that there's no cal form. So we're just looking at what the Heath pile says. To hide oneself. So Blue Letter Bible gives you the reflexive sense here. To hide oneself. So what is the expression conveying? Reflexive action. Because we didn't notice any nuances that fit the context. So it's conveying reflexive action, and it means to hide oneself. What's the significance of that? They were energized. They were intentional about hiding themselves. So this wasn't something some afterthought. There was purpose embedded into hiding themselves from Yahweh. Purposeful hiding.
Reflex is something you do automatically without thinking.
Yeah.
So if this is reflexive, they just automatically are hiding from God.
Yeah.
Without even thinking about it.
Right, and they're doing it for their own good too.
Yes.
And I think that's baked in. Yeah, good, Keith. Yeah, purposeful, performed for themselves, hiding from God.
That's really interesting when you say it like that, because it kind of speaks to the born-in fallen nature of man. Like, it was just something they were doing.
Yeah,
Yeah, without even thinking, they were hiding.
they're like, oh, that's just the knee-jerk reaction.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Good. Okay. Let's look at 2 Samuel 7:11 and see what we find here. All right, 2 Samuel 7, we got the Davidic covenant, and in 7:11 we have click on our tools, we pull up the reverse inline, and we're looking for I will give you rest. Here we go. Okay, so we're going to click on the little bubble down there. I will give rest. What are the parts of speech?
Starts with H, but I can't make it out.
It's a hifil, and it's a vekatal. Okay, so what do we do with the hifil? Hifil is the causative active stem. Okay, so the subject is causing the object to perform an action. I am causing you to have rest. That would be a way that we would render that. Then what's our next step? We're looking at, do one of these nuances show up? I will begin to give you rest. That would be the ingressive stative. Or I will begin to allow you to enter into the state of rest. Could that fit? Could it be permissive? I am allowing you to have rest that you desire also. What would this expression convey? If it's in the hifil, it's the causative active. So that's part of what the expression conveys, causative action. And yeah. I would put this under a permissive hifil. This falls into one of those nuances where the action is allowed by the subject, which is Yahweh in this case, and it's agreeable to the object for Israel or for David. It's something that he desires, and Yahweh's allowing it to happen. So yes, this would fall into a permissive hifil. And what's the significance of that? This is something that Yahweh's allowing and David wants. Like how infrequently do we find that in Scripture, where it's something that Yahweh's okay with performing some action that's he's okay with performing, that the person is also desirous of, or it's agreeable for that person. That doesn't come up very often. So there's a permissive, like a father to a son. I'm allowing you to have this particular treat or something. There's a deeper intimate relationship, I think, conveyed by this permissive hifil, but also we get a sense of David's desires and Yahweh's will aligning, and that's where I would place the significance of a familial relationship and an interconnectedness of permission and desire. Okay. Let's look at Joshua 1:1. Here we've got another one that's a little different. Joshua 1:1. Make sure that we stay on track here. All right, we pulled up Joshua 1:1. We're clicking interlinear. We're getting our reverse inline. And we're looking for now it came about. All right, what do we got here? We have this expression up here. Now it came about. Where did we find that? We had that somewhere up here near the top. Macrosyntactical marker. That's what it looks like. We're like, okay, that's what this is. That's what this is here. It looks like that. It's at the very beginning of a book. Now it came about. Typically when you see that rendered in Blue Letter Bible or in English, we're like, okay, what's going on here? And what is that? What does that do? What does that tell us? What is this called? This is called I would just abbreviate an MSM. And what is that conveying? Beginning of a new narrative, a new scene, a new narrative. What's the significance of that? We know where one starts and one stops. So it's one of those things that I've identified. I know what it's conveying. What's the significance? There isn't a whole lot. I just know this is where Joshua begins. Joshua begins here.
Could it just be like necessarily signifying just like some time has passed and now here we are?
It could convey some temporal time span has taken place. It would be largely more like our English once upon a time. Like right. I'm starting a new story here.
Okay.
Then it came about once upon a time when the sun went down. This happened. So that's basically where you stop at. You've identified it. You know what it means. What does it mean by what's the significance of it? I just know that's where it starts. So again, some things far more important, some things far less important. All right, Isaiah 42:1. That's number 10. Oops, 42. Let's go to Isaiah 42:1. Behold my servant whom I uphold. So here you have Yahweh speaking, and we're looking at the term I uphold. So let's click on the bubble. And what are our parts of speech? And we got a cow, and we have imperfect. Good. Okay. And then what are we doing with the cow? We're looking for feantive and stative, right? Okay. Let's look at the outline of biblical usage and their list of different ways we can translate this. Is this cow feantive or stative? Feantive, yeah. There's no to be anywhere in there. The to be is down here with the nifal, which we would expect because it's the passive form of that. But under the cow, there's no to be. So we've got a cow, imperfect, and I would just write feantive, so I know it's just conveying action. What is it conveying? Simple action. Now, we can take that a step further, and we've got our verb box, right? We've got our verb box at the end. Where did I put that? I will uphold. All right, let's go back to the bottom of our sheet that we've got here, and we've got this verb box, and we like, okay, it's a cow, it's an imperfect. What do I do with a cow imperfect that's feantive? Feantive here, imperfect here. Okay, it's either ingressive, either it's action that's beginning or action that's continuing. How would we render this?
The began.
Began?
Continue.
Yeah, continuing. I would lean more towards continuing there. I am continuing to uphold my servant. Continuous action. So that's what I would note in expression conveys. And then what's the significance of that? Yahweh's continually upholding his servant. There's not a point which he's stopping. He's talking about continually upholding his servant.
Eyes on him at all times.
Yeah. Eyes on. And not growing weary, right? I'm constantly upholding my servant, my chosen one.
Referring to Christ here?
Yeah, this is a uppercase servant, which Nasby does a good job here. Okay, let's go to a different portion of Scripture. Let's jump into some poetry for a moment. Let's look at Psalm 10:11. That's number 11 on your sheet. Psalm 10:11. All right. And so where are we situated here? Why do you hide yourself? Here we have this psalm. It says, in his heart I shall not be moved. Sits in ambush, lurks in the ambush. Helpless are crushed. And he says in his heart, God has forgotten. He's hidden his face. He will never see it. Okay, this is somebody in some sort of trouble. God has forgotten. He has hidden his face. Now let's look at the expression itself, God has forgotten. All right, and here it is. We'll click on the bubble at the bottom, and what do we have here for our parts of speech? We have our stem up here, and we have our type. We got a cow perfect. Okay. And what are we doing with the cow? Or what are we looking for? Feantive or stative, right? Yeah. All right, let's look at the glosses. Is this feantive or stative? Feantive, yeah. There's no to be verb in there anywhere. All right. All right, we've got cow, perfect, feantive. Let's go back to our verb box. And we got a feantive. Except this one's a perfect. What are we looking at? Just action as a whole, completed action. Okay, and then what were we? He says to himself, God has forgotten. Completed action. What's the significance of that? We're just looking at this snapshot of this person saying to himself, God has forgotten. He's not He's not begun to forget. He's forgotten. We're looking at past tense activity probably here in a completed action.
So he's saying in his heart there is no hope.
Yeah. That's good, Keith. No hope. Yeah, fantastic. He's hidden his face. And remember in Hebrew culture, the Aaronic benediction, his face shine upon you. The idea of having his face shining on someone was their way of expressing God's attentive care, his intervention, his affection in someone's life. And so for this person to say he's hidden his face, he's forgotten and he's hidden his face, there's no hope. There's no hope. Yeah. Good job. Okay, let's do a couple more and then we'll call it. Because we got a fair bit more. But you see the process that we're doing. We're pulling up the passage. We're clicking on the tools. We're going to the reverse inline. We're looking at the particular term. We're looking at the parts of speech. Then we're thinking about, okay, where does this connect in with our reference material? And then we're thinking about what is it actually saying? What is it meaning? And is there any significance to what's being expressed here beyond what we get from just looking at the text itself? Okay, let's look at, well, we don't need to do 13 because we covered that. Let's look at number 18. Exodus 29:46. Exodus 29:46. Here we have this portion at the end where Yahweh's explaining the dwelling of Israel, consecrating the tent of meeting, and explaining other expectations for Israel. And he tells them, I am Yahweh their God who brought them out of the land of Egypt. Okay, so now I'm looking for the expression who brought them out. Okay, what do we have here for our parts of speech? Yeah, he feel perfect. Okay, and what are we doing with the Hefil? Let's go back and find it. All right, so we know that the Hefil is the causative active stem, so that's what part of the expression conveys, causative action. There's a sense in which the subject is the agent of action. That's also part of the Hefil at the bottom here of our expression. Subject is the agent of action. Okay. Is this ingressive? Is this permissive? Could we put it under one of these nuances based on the context? I am Yahweh their God who began to bring them out of the land of Egypt. I am Yahweh their God who allowed them to come out of Egypt because it was part of what they wanted. Or is this just the basic causative active sense?
Looks like the basic causative action.
Yeah, good job, Keith. Basic causative active, and I would just leave it as that. Maybe underline causative active, so you know that there's no additional nuance. Yeah, I mean, there you could make a case. if you're going to say continuative action,
Maybe from an overall viewpoint of
right.
the plan, yes.
Right. And I think you could also make a valid case for permissive, even though it would be a long shot. I'm the one who allowed them to come out of Egypt, which is what they wanted. But I would agree with Keith that this is probably just the basic hifil. So what's the significance of that?
I was just gonna say, would you recommend maybe leaning towards the most, what would be more obvious, instead of looking immediately more deeper, kind of like what I was doing, but
Right.
maybe it's safer to go just the simple causative.
Yeah, so I would start with that.
Okay.
And then once you've taken note of, okay, this is what the expression conveys, it's causative active, then I would pause and ask myself, do these two fit? Could I make a case that these two fit in the context?
Yeah.
And in some sense, you could fit one. In some sense, you could fit the other. But my initial inclination would be just stick with the basic one.
Yeah, I would say for ingressive, if
Yeah.
I did argue that, I'd have to go outside of where we're at.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
More
you
of a
should.
hindsight type.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you would have to be able to argue this from its surrounding context or the context in the clause.
It's better to stay where you're at.
Right.
Okay.
Right. There are some that, like we looked at earlier, the permissive one, where it's a little bit more obvious in its context, like 2 Samuel 7. Right. That's a little bit more obvious in the context of what's being said, and in the context of that particular clause, that there's a permissive sense. Yeah.
This is where the whole realm of Scripture comes in.
Mm-hmm.
Because we can go all the way back to the Abrahamic covenant,
Yeah.
that your descendants will go into Egypt.
Yeah.
I will bring them out.
Right.
So it's definitely positive.
Yeah. Yeah. There's the causative sense, and what's the exegetical significance of this? If we look at the rest of that clause, what is he saying? I, Yahweh, am the one who's done this.
Yeah.
Me, not anybody else, not a golden calf, nobody.
Yeah, I was gonna say ownership.
All right.
Yeah.
Ownership, responsibility, and this carries into later in redemptive history, in outside of the Pentateuch, when you're looking at them looking for somebody else to be their deliverer, right? When we looked at 1 Samuel 10, and we were looking at their desire for a king to be what God has already been for them the whole time. So there's a sense of ownership, a sense of I'm the one who did this, I'm laying claim, and we can further emphasize that case with the repetition. I am Yahweh, their God. I'm the one who's done this. Nobody else, nothing else. Yeah. Ownership. Responsibility. Yeah. He gets the glory for it, right? I'm not sharing my glory with anybody else.
Right. Yeah. We can also look to God never does not answer his promises. Like to go a little further, like he promises, it's a guarantee.
Right.
Basically.
Yeah.
Here's the proof.
Yeah. I'm going to answer my promises. I'm going to fulfill what I've promised. Yeah. That's good. Okay, let's look at one more, and then we'll pause for today and we'll pray. Let's look at.
I have another meeting I need.
Okay. Thanks, Mark, for coming. Okay. Let's look at the last one, Ezekiel 38:14. Ezekiel 38:14. And we've got the tools brought up, we've got the reverse inline brought up, and we're looking at the term dwelling. Let's see if we can find it here. Our living, I guess, in this New American Standard. All right, what do we have here? What's our parts of speech?
Call infinite.
Cal, infinitive construct.
Yep.
All right. And here's how using the Blue Letter Bible will help you with this. Up here at the top, they have this little thingy. But if you click the tab that's right next to it, it says, okay, here's this preposition that's added onto it. And so then we go back to our reference sheet and we find infinitives. We find infinitive construct. And infinitive construct with, what's that little thing here? This little guy. This is the bait preposition. That plus an infinitive construct tells us what?
Temporal infinitive.
Yeah, okay. So I would put plus that little dooley bob so that you can identify it. And that's telling us the expression conveys a temporal infinitive. Okay? But there's more to it than that because the one below it is also a temporal infinitive. What's this temporal infinitive tell us? Temporal infinitive, and it's action that's simultaneous to the verb. Yeah, and so we would say, we would supply when or while. When, while, action simultaneous to verb. Okay? My people Israel are dwelling securely. Or look at here. We don't even have to do any legwork here. They've supplied it for us. See these two? This little chain connects these two phrases together. The little teal. And they've already supplied the temporal term for us. When my people Israel are dwelling securely. So we know what's the exegetical significance of this. There will be a time when they dwell securely, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say there's gonna be a day where that's gonna happen.
Yeah. There will be a time when they dwell securely.
Right.
Temporally speaking, because we've got a temporal term here. Where does this take place? When does this take place? Brian knows.
What's that?
I said Brian knows. When does this take place?
For
When they will dwell securely.
the future.
Yeah, what part of the future? The millennial kingdom, right?
I'm still working it out.
Okay.
I have not gone deep into that.
Right. So we know there is a time temporally when they will be dwelling securely.
Eschatology is
Yep.
a very deep well, my
Yeah.
friend.
Yeah. Okay, so we covered a fair bit of these. There's a few that we didn't do. Those are things that you can circle back and do on your own. And just working through this same process that we've done for the last hour or so. Finding what's underlined, writing down the parts of speech, writing down what that conveys, the particular parts of speech convey, emphasis, certainty, wish, desire, so forth. And then thinking about why is that significant? What else does that bring to the table? Why is it? Why are we sitting up and taking note of that particular idea? Any other questions about this? And then I will go ahead and pray for us today. And then next week we'll dive in head first to Habakkuk.
As far as homework,
Yeah.
are we wait till we just come to class and work on it there? Or?
No, so the way that it's designed, the study packet is designed for you to put in 20 to 30 minutes, more if you want to, every morning. Make this Habakkuk study a part of your devotional time over the course of the summer. Doesn't mean you can't do anything else also. But do the study questions. Some of them will take you 2 minutes. Some of them will take you 10. So pick one, do one a day. Try to focus on once you've finished the study questions. Set aside some time to do the big four questions: the what, the why, the so what, and the now what, because those are Those are really important. And what we'll do next week is we will kind of workshop that first one together, so the guys who are new get a sense of, like, what are we actually doing in this? Because it's easy to read the study packet and read the stuff, but then it's like, okay, I'm still kind of confused as to what I need to do. So we'll workshop for those first 4 questions together. But yeah, just set aside 30-ish minutes a day and work through that.
Back at the thing you already sent out.
Yeah, it's on Church Center.
Okay.
And if you can't access it on Church Center, please email me, call me, text me, whatever it is, and let me know that you can't find it, and I will email you a copy.
Oh, what's it called?
On Church Center. It would be under what do we got?
See that resource?
Yeah, group.